That Barrett .50 weighs more than she does. A young officer burst into laughter as he watched the slim woman place the massive rifle on its stand. The entire group erupted in laughter, thinking this was just another show-off moment. They had no idea what they were about to witness. But when the general walked past, his eyes suddenly locked onto something carved into the wooden plaque beside the weapon. 3,200 meters, confirmed kill. He froze completely. The entire room fell into dead silence. Type honor if you believe silence can carry more weight than any metal. Meet Captain Eliza Hawthorne, 34 years old, with a lean frame and steel blue eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, not a strand out of place. This was the annual weapons exhibition at Fort Braxton Military Base. Hundreds of soldiers and officers moved through the massive hangar, examining the latest military technology. Everything from advanced drones to experimental armor was on display. Eliza sat quietly beside the Barrett M82A 1.50 caliber rifle. To everyone walking by, she looked like just another soldier on equipment duty, nothing special. Just a woman keeping the display weapons clean and organized. She wore standard fatigues with captain's bars, no ribbons, no medals, no decorations screaming for attention, just her name tape, Hawthorne, in bold letters. Most visitors barely glanced her way, but that was about to change. A group of young officers approached her station, fresh from officer training, full of confidence and eager to impress each other, the type who believed military service was all about showing off. "Hey, look at this monster," one called out, pointing at the Barrett rifle. "Now that's a real weapon." A cocky lieutenant noticed Eliza beside the rifle. "Is this your job?" he asked with a smirk. "Babysitting the big guns while real soldiers do the fighting?" Eliza didn't respond. She continued cleaning the rifle's scope with steady movements. Some battles weren't worth fighting with words. "I bet she's never even fired this thing," another officer whispered loudly. "These display models are just for show anyway." 3,200 meters, Eliza said quietly, not looking up. "What did you say?" The lieutenant leaned closer. "Nothing," Eliza replied, returning to her work. The group exchanged glances and continued their mockery. They had no idea what they were about to witness. That's when General Arthur Kingsley appeared. Arthur Kingsley was a military legend, 43 years of service, 3 combat deployments, and respect from every soldier who'd served under him. When Kingsley entered a room, conversation stopped and back straightened. He made his routine inspection, moving quickly from station to station, his aide following behind, taking notes on a tablet. The general approached Eliza's station with the same brisk pace. He glanced at the Barrett rifle, nodded, and prepared to move on. Then he saw a small wooden plaque beside the rifle bore an inscription that froze his blood. "Longest confirmed kill, 3,200 meters, Captain E. Hawthorne, classified Operation Hindu Kush." General Kingsley stopped dead. His aide nearly collided with him. The young officers fell silent as they watched the general's expression change from casual interest to complete shock. For the first time in years, Arthur Kingsley was speechless. The room began to quiet as soldiers noticed something happening. All eyes turned toward Eliza Hawthorne, still cleaning her scope with calm precision beside her. Barrett .50. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the young officers completely missed what had just happened. They were too busy enjoying their moment of superiority to notice the general's shocked expression. "Seriously though," the lieutenant continued, his voice getting louder. 3,000 meters? Come on, lady. That's like 2 miles. Nobody shoots that far with any accuracy." His buddies laughed even harder. One of them, a second lieutenant with barely 6 months of service, stepped closer to the Barrett rifle. "This thing probably kicks harder than she weighs. I bet she's never even held a real rifle in combat." Eliza's hands never stopped moving. Clean the scope, check the barrel, adjust the bipod legs. Her movements were precise, methodical, almost ritualistic, but her steel blue eyes flickered up for just a moment, meeting the second lieutenant's gaze. That look should have been a warning. It carried the weight of mountains, the silence of snow-covered peaks, and something much darker underneath. But these young officers were too drunk on their own arrogance to read the signs. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The lieutenant snapped his fingers near Eliza's face. "What unit are you even from? Logistics? Supply? I bet you've never been downrange in your life." Still, Eliza said nothing. She reached into her cleaning kit and pulled out a small brush, beginning to clean the rifle's trigger mechanism with the same careful attention. "Oh, this is Rich," another officer joined in. "Look, guys, we've got ourselves a real warrior princess here. Probably thinks she's some kind of sniper because she can clean a rifle." The mockery was getting louder now, drawing attention from other parts of the exhibition. Several soldiers stopped their conversations and turned toward the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable, but nobody stepped in to stop it. "You know what I think?" The lead lieutenant leaned against the display table, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think someone made a mistake with that little plaque there. 3,000 meters? That's gotta be some kind of joke. Maybe it's supposed to say 30 meters. Or 3 meters. His friends erupted in laughter. One of them actually slapped his knee. 3 meters. That's more realistic. She probably couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from 3 feet away. That's when Staff Sergeant Frederick Bauer appeared at the edge of the group. Bauer was a grizzled veteran with 22 years of service, most of it in special operations. He'd been watching the scene unfold from across the room, and his expression was getting darker by the second. "Gentlemen," Bauer said quietly, "you might want to step away from the captain." The lieutenant turned around with an annoyed expression. "And who are you supposed to be, Sergeant?" "This is officer business." Bauer's jaw tightened. "That's Staff Sergeant Bauer, sir, and I'm trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your military career." "Mistake?" The lieutenant laughed. "What mistake? Asking this supply clerk some questions about a rifle she's probably never fired?" Bauer looked over at Eliza, who was still focused on her cleaning. She gave him the slightest shake of her head, a signal that said, "Let them dig their own grave." "Your funeral, sir," Bauer muttered, stepping back. The officers turned back to Eliza with renewed confidence. They thought they'd just won some kind of victory by intimidating a sergeant. "So, here's what I think happened," the lieutenant continued, now playing to a growing audience. "Someone in paperwork screwed up, mixed up some files, put the wrong name on the wrong plaque. Because there's no way this little girl has the longest confirmed kill shot in military history." That's when Major Beatrice Fleming walked up behind the group. Fleming was a military intelligence officer with access to classified databases, and she'd been quietly observing the situation while working on her tablet computer. "Actually," Fleming said in a clear, authoritative voice, "the plaque is completely accurate." The lieutenant spun around. "I'm sorry, Major, but—" "Staff Sergeant Bauer was right," Fleming interrupted. "You're about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Would you like to know why?" She held up her tablet, showing a classified military database entry. The screen displayed a detailed service record with a photo that unmistakably showed Eliza Hawthorne. "Captain Eliza Hawthorne," Fleming read aloud. "Delta Force, Sniper Attachment, Operation Enduring Freedom. 7 combat deployments, 43 confirmed kills, longest confirmed kill, 3,200 meters, Hindu Kush mountain range, Afghanistan." The color drained from the lieutenant's face. "That shot," Fleming continued, "saved the lives of an entire special operations team that was pinned down by enemy fire. The target was eliminated at a distance that broke the previous world record. The operation was classified top secret for national security reasons. The exhibition hall had gone completely quiet. Dozens of soldiers and officers stood in stunned silence, watching this career-ending moment unfold. The captain," Fleming added, "has never requested recognition for her service. She's never applied for medals or commendations for that shot. In fact, she specifically requested that her role remain classified." Eliza finally looked up from her rifle cleaning. Her steel blue eyes swept across the group of young officers, then moved to the growing crowd of spectators. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindicated. She looked tired. "Is there anything else you'd like to know about my service record?" she asked quietly. The silence was deafening. "What's your reaction when you see an entire room forced into silence by the truth? Where are you watching this video from?" They laughed until the truth left them speechless. "Comment respect if you believe justice always finds its way, even in the quietest moments." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then General Kingsley stepped forward, his weathered face grave with the weight of memories that had been classified for years. "Stand at attention," he commanded in a voice that had led soldiers through 3 decades of combat. Every officer in the exhibition hall snapped to attention, immediately back straight, eyes forward, hands at their sides. The only person who didn't move was Eliza Hawthorne, who continued sitting beside her Barrett rifle, methodically cleaning the weapon as if nothing had happened. "Captain Hawthorne," the general said, his voice softer now, "permission to speak about Operation Thunder Ridge." Eliza looked up for the first time since the confrontation began. Her steel blue eyes met the general's, and, for a moment, something passed between them, a shared understanding of things that couldn't be spoken aloud in mixed company. "That operation is still classified, sir," Eliza replied quietly. "Not anymore," Kingsley said, pulling out his phone. "As of 0800 hours this morning, Thunder Ridge has been declassified for historical documentation purposes." He held up the phone, showing an official Pentagon communication. 30 years overdue, if you ask me. "Silbo." The general turned to face the crowd that had gathered around Eliza's station: soldiers, officers, civilian contractors, and visiting dignitaries, all pressed closer to hear what he was about to reveal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kingsley began, "what you're about to hear is the true story of the longest confirmed kill shot in United States military history. A shot that saved 37 American lives and changed the course of a critical operation in Afghanistan." Eliza's hands stilled on her rifle for just a moment, then resumed their careful cleaning. "The 15th of March, 2011, Kingsley continued, "Captain Hawthorne was attached to a Delta Force reconnaissance team conducting intelligence gathering in the Hindu Kush mountain range. The team was designated Bravo 6-7, and their mission was to locate and assess a high-value target who had been orchestrating attacks on coalition forces. The hall was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. The operation went sideways when the team was compromised by local militia forces. Bravo 6-7F found themselves pinned down in a valley with no extraction route and enemy forces closing in from 3 directions. Their radio communications were being jammed, and air support was 20 minutes out." Kingsley's voice carried the weight of command decisions that had haunted him for years. "That's when Captain Hawthorne made a decision that defied every military manual ever written. She climbed to a ridge position that was completely exposed to enemy fire, carrying her Barrett M82A1 and enough ammunition for exactly 1 shot. Eliza's cleaning motions never stopped, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The target was an enemy commander positioned on an opposing ridgeline, directing the assault on our trap team. The distance was measured by laser rangefinder at 3,200 meters. That's nearly 2 miles in mountainous terrain with unpredictable wind conditions and a target that was partially concealed. One of the young officers who had been mocking Eliza just minutes earlier made a small choking sound. The physics of that shot were beginning to sink in. A shot at that distance requires calculating for wind speed, air density, temperature, humidity, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, and about a dozen other variables that most people can't even pronounce. Kingsley continued, "The bullet would be in the air for approximately 4 seconds. The target could move, the wind could shift, 1,000 things could go wrong." Eliza finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 4.2 seconds, sir. Time of flight was 4.2 seconds. Kingsley nodded gravely. Captain Hawthorne took the shot. 1 round, 3,200 meters, mountainous terrain, enemy fire incoming. The bullet traveled for 4.2 seconds and eliminated the target with a center mass hit. The crowd was transfixed. This wasn't just a military story anymore. This was physics and human skill colliding at an almost superhuman level. Within 30 seconds of the target being eliminated, the enemy assault collapsed. Their command structure was broken. Our team was able to move to extraction, and all 37 members of Bravo 6-7M ate it home alive. Kingsley walked over to where Eliza sat and stood directly in front of her. Captain Hawthorne never filed an after-action report about the shot, never requested recognition, never applied for medals or commendations. When asked why, her response was documented in my personal files. He pulled out a small notebook, worn from years of carrying it in his uniform pocket. I asked her why she didn't want recognition for what was clearly the shot of a lifetime. Her exact words were, "Sir, the sound of that rifle said everything that needed to be said. Those 37 soldiers made it home to their families. That's the only medal I need." Several people in the crowd were openly emotional now. The young lieutenant who had started the confrontation looked like he might be sick. "But here's what makes Captain Hawthorne truly exceptional," Kingsley continued, closing his notebook. "That shot at 3,200 meters, It wasn't her longest kill. Eliza's hand stopped moving entirely. 2 months later, on a classified operation that remains above my clearance level even today, Captain Hawthorne made a confirmed kill at 3,400 meters. But that record will never appear on any plaque or in any official documentation. The general's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the dead silence of the exhibition hall, every word carried clearly. Because some things are too important for recognition, some victories are too critical for publicity, and some heroes are too valuable to be celebrated. He stepped back and rendered a perfect military salute to Eliza Hawthorne, who was still sitting beside her rifle with cleaning supplies in her hands. Captain Hawthorne requested transfer to training duties because she said she was tired of being the person who had to take those shots. She wanted to teach others so she wouldn't have to carry that burden alone. Eliza finally looked up at the general, and for just a moment, her steel blue eyes showed something that might have been gratitude. The rifle you see here belonged to Captain Hawthorne during her combat deployments. She maintains it personally because, in her words, a tool that saves lives deserves respect. Kingsley lowered his salute and turned to address the crowd one final time. This is what real heroism looks like, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't seek glory. It simply does what needs to be done, then goes quietly back to work. The exhibition hall remained in absolute silence as the full weight of Eliza's true identity settled over everyone present. The first person to move was Lieutenant Pembroke, his face pale and hands shaking as he stepped forward. "Captain Hawthorne," he said, voice cracking, "I need to apologize. What I said was completely wrong." Eliza held up one hand, stopping him. "Lieutenant, how long have you been in service?" 8 months, ma'am." Eliza looked at each young officer. "Combat experience between all of you?" Uncomfortable glances, no answers. "None," Eliza said quietly. "That's not criticism, that's fact. 8 months ago, you were civilians. Today, you're officers with a lot to learn." She stood for the first time, her lean frame suddenly commanding the space. Military service isn't about who talks loudest or looks most impressive. It's about doing the hardest thing at the worst moment, then living with the consequences forever. Pembroke nodded rapidly, eyes on the floor. "Every person wearing this uniform has a story you don't know. That quiet sergeant might have pulled soldiers from burning vehicles. The supply clerk might have survived IED attacks. The woman cleaning rifles might have saved more lives than you'll ever know." Eliza's voice stayed calm, each word carrying absolute authority. "What you did was disrespectful, but more dangerous in combat. Assumptions kill people. If you can't trust fellow soldiers, you can't lead them." General Kingsley stepped forward. "Captain Hawthorne, permission to change base training protocol." Eliza nodded. "Effective immediately," Kingsley announced. "Every new officer spends their first week learning about the service records of personnel they'll work with, not classified details. But enough to understand heroism comes in many forms." He gestured toward Eliza's station. "We're establishing the Hawthorne Training Protocol, a mandatory combat decision-making course." Eliza's eyebrows rose. "Sir, that's not necessary." "Absolutely necessary," Kingsley interrupted gently. "These officers need to understand what they're asking people to do in combat." Pembroke stepped forward again. "Captain Hawthorne, anything we can do to make this right?" Eliza looked at him, then at the watching crowd. "Yes, Lieutenant." She walked to an American flag on the wall and touched it gently. "Remember, this flag represents people who made choices they didn't want to make so others didn't have to. Respect that. Honor that. Never assume you know someone's story until they tell it." The room erupted in applause, but Eliza had already returned to her rifle, resuming her methodical cleaning with the same precision she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Within hours, word spread throughout Fort Braxton. The story of Captain Hawthorne and the young officers became legendary. Soldiers began approaching Eliza's station not to mock, but to learn. A new sign appeared beside her display. "Respect isn't claimed, it's earned in silence." The Barrett rifle remained in its place, but now visitors understood they weren't just looking at a weapon. They were looking at a tool that had saved 37 lives in the hands of someone who chose teaching over glory. Eliza continued her quiet work, content that the lesson had been learned. Sometimes, the loudest statement comes from the softest voice. You want to know what I was thinking during all of that, while those young officers were making their jokes and assumptions? I was thinking about Sergeant Leclerc. Leclerc was on that ridge with me in Hindu Kush, 22 years old, a kid from El Paso with a wife and newborn daughter back home. When we got pinned down, when the situation went sideways, Leclerc looked at me and said, "Captain, if you don't take that shot, we're all going home in boxes." So, 2 seconds. That's how long my bullet was in the air before it found its target 3,200 meters away. But Leclerc had been waiting his whole life for someone to take that shot. So had the other 36 men trapped in that valley. People think sniping is about the shot. It's not. It's about the moment before the shot. When you realize that everything, every life, every family, every future depends on your ability to be absolutely perfect under the worst possible circumstances. I never wanted recognition for that shot because it wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Leclerc, who spotted the target, to Corporal Norwood, who calculated wind speed while bullets flew over his head, to Staff Sergeant Tate, who kept our position secure while I lined up the shot. The rifle you saw me cleaning today? It's the same weapon that fired that round. I maintain it not because it's special, but because tools that save lives deserve respect. Every scratch, every worn surface tells a story about moments when precision meant the difference between soldiers coming home or not. Those young officers today learned something important, but not what you might think. They didn't learn about my service record or my kill count. They learned that assumptions are dangerous in combat. Assuming you know someone's capabilities gets people killed. I've trained hundreds of soldiers since I left active combat duty. Want to know what I teach them first? Not marksmanship, not tactics. I teach them to listen. Listen to the soldier who speaks quietly. They might have seen things you can't imagine. Listen to the person who doesn't volunteer their story. They might be carrying weight you couldn't handle. Listen to the sound of silence. It often contains more truth than any words. That Barrett .50 sitting in the exhibition hall isn't a trophy. It's a reminder that real strength doesn't announce itself, real courage doesn't seek applause, real heroism happens in the space between heartbeats, in moments when doing nothing would be easier than doing everything. The military taught me many things, but the most important lesson came from that 4.2-second flight time in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Sometimes, the most important words you'll ever speak are the ones you never say out loud. The 37 soldiers who made it home that day, they know my story. Their families know my story. That's the only audience that matters. Everything else is just noise. Subscribe to HC Stories if you believe true respect is forged not in words, but in silence and truth.